For today's Yu-Gi-Oh! Review, we're talking about the duel that was set up by the very end of the stuff we covered in our previous review. Yugi versus Kaiba, the rematch. Something that we already kind of got this arc, except that not Kaiba that Yugi faced back then was basically just the evil Kaiba, the part of Kaiba that Yugi destroyed in the penalty game from their last battle, manifested. So it was kind of like Yugi now versus Kaiba then. And even then, Yugi struggled to beat him. This is Yugi now versus Kaiba now. And during their duel here, Yugi acknowledges that this is not the same Kaiba he fought before. Not just in that he's rebuilt himself from the ground up after the Mind Crush, but in that he's approaching the game in a very different way than he used to. Kaiba as a duelist used to be someone who would just fill the field with overpowered monsters and beat his opponent down, trusting that he had the resources to buy better cards than whatever opponent he was up against. He used combinations to power up things like the Dark Clown, but he's not really one to rely on spell and trap cards. Even in Yugi's duel against the false Kaiba, he really only used cards that helped him overcome one-off battles where he didn't have the advantage. And his strategy remained the same, to fill the board up with as many monsters as possible. But here, Yugi and Kaiba are going to duel using the Duel Disk, which only has space for one active monster at a time. So he has to think tactically while using it. And it's unclear exactly when he developed this thing, because he did develop it specifically to beat Pegasus after learning that Pegasus can apparently see his opponent's hand. So it's likely that he was already developing the mindset he needed to play the game more tactically in order to use this thing anyway. But he is still more careful here than we have ever seen him, designing his entire strategy around building the greatest gap in power between himself and his opponent as he possibly can. And he also goes into the duel with a very specific mindset. Last time he lost to Yugi, he seemed to be at a disadvantage because Yugi was able to draw strength from the fact that he was fighting for others. Something that Kaiba thought was ridiculous. He sees that as a weight on your shoulders, something that would quite literally weigh you down and make you weaker. And yet here he is fighting for his brother. And so he goes into this duel looking to prove once and for all whether or not that makes you stronger, because if it does, then he will certainly be strong enough to win. And not only is this duel a breath of fresh air next to all of the various Duelist Kingdom duels that we've been getting up to this point, where like the surprise of like the field power bonuses and stuff, it's kind of worn off at this point. Because the Duel Disk does have new rules. We didn't see all of them when you fought Jinochi. They were playing on basic mode. This is now expert mode. It brings up holograms of the cards, which kind of half block your body and face from your opponent. Something that Kaiba developed specifically in case Pegasus' ability requires line of sight, though making giant holograms of your cards seems to be kind of stupid, because if it doesn't require line of sight, if it's like somebody watching from the distance and then relaying it to him, something that we actually see a villain, or I guess antagonist technically, do in a later duel, then making the cards bigger is just going to make that easier for them. Whatever, it's fine. It makes these big holograms, and if you look at the way the Duel Disk is designed, it has the central monster slot and then 4 other cards that all kind of point up towards it. And that's because in expert mode, all of those cards, if they're spell or trap cards, they only affect that one monster. But if you build a really strong hand of cards that can all affect that one monster, you can give it all of these powerful abilities at once. But the downside to that is technically every card in your hand is active at the same time, even if it is face down, and all of the cards with attack or defense points are in attack mode. So your opponent can attack them, and if you have decided to not show your hand yet and you have a powerful monster in reserve, there's a chance that they're attacking into that. But if they attack a weak monster, you'll take damage. So you have to balance the risk-reward of playing your strongest monster in the active zone or reserving it to try to catch your opponent off guard. It adds a whole new dimension to combat, especially considering that Kaiba has 3 Blue Eyes White Dragons in his deck. So if you try to attack into his face-down cards to get rid of some spell or trap that he might use later, or one that he's already used, because you can shuffle your hand up and the cards don't remain face up. They have to be reactivated. There's a chance that you're going to attack into his Blue Eyes instead of whichever card you're trying to hit. It really is brilliant. He really has stacked the entire game against his opponent. And when at one point Yugi gets a look at his hand using the effects of one of his cards and sees that Kaiba is holding a Blue Eyes in reserve, everyone wonders why he hasn't played it yet. And it's because Kaiba's plan is to fuse all 3 of his Blue Eyes together into a monster which, in the manga, at least at this point, is literally the strongest monster in the game in terms of its stats. And then use the Crush Card Virus, combined with his Sagi the Dark Clown, a monster weak enough to be infected by it, to pass the infection to Yugi's entire deck, destroying every monster that he draws with more than 1,500 attack points. And since the rule of the dual disc is that you draw enough cards to refill the entire 5 slots, that means that there's a chance Yugi's going to be drawing multiple cards per turn, which means his deck is going to be destroyed even faster. And because of this, between the 4,500 attack points of the Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon and the fact that Yugi's only drawing things with 1,500 attack points, even if he powers up his lead monster, there's a very small chance that he's ever going to come anywhere close to the Blue Eyes Ultimate's attack points. And if he tries to defend himself, then Kaiba can just attack his reserve cards and try to hit a monster there, because anything he hits, the difference between their attack points is going to be more than Yugi's original 2,000 life points. That's not even considering the fact that he has less life points than that now. Kaiba feels like he has won this duel. It's only because Yugi still sees value in things that are superficially weak, which is something that Kaiba still isn't able to do, that Yugi's able to pull ahead, using the Kuriboh combined with Multiply to, again, making use of the fact that these are holograms, literally fill the space between himself and Kaiba's dragon, so that the only thing on his side of the field that Kaiba can attack is Kuriboh, negating the fact that Kaiba should be allowed to target his other cards. And because of the way Kuriboh and Multiply work in the manga/anime, this means that he has an infinite wall for as long as he needs it. But because dual disc rules say that you don't draw cards unless you need to draw cards, it's not like he can just wait to deck Kaiba out or something. They'll literally never draw any more cards. Unless they do something, they'll be a stalemate forever. So Yugi uses one of his spell cards to fuse with the fusion, combining an undead monster with the ultimate dragon, basically inflicting it with a curse of corpse rot, which is silly. It's a gimmicky thing that I could never see working in the actual card game, but it's very cool here. The dragon starts to lose attack points equal to the monster that was force fused with it each turn. And since it's technically still 3 monsters, because again, the rules at this point were kind of wonky about that, it's still basically filling up Kaiba's field, making it impossible for him to draw anything else. And it gets weak enough that Yugi's able to start destroying its 3 heads one after another and dealing damage. Like, it's unclear why Kaiba didn't just switch it to defense mode at this point to protect his life points. Maybe he could have, and he just didn't because of what he does next. But, I mean, Yugi's basically won. All of Kaiba's preparation, his perfect strategy, didn't amount to anything. Yugi was able to turn it around in 2 moves. And it kind of shatters Kaiba's faith in himself. Like, you can tell part of him really was hoping that fighting for someone would give him the strength he needed. And in the end, I guess it kind of does. Because when he sees that Yugi is going to win, he decides that, and they're fighting on top of the castle. I haven't made that clear, but they're fighting on top of the castle. He decides that from this point forward, each time he loses life points, he's going to step one floor tile back, or paving stone back, I guess. And that eventually that will mean him stepping off of the castle tower to his death. And we see he would definitely die in a panel that, despite being drawn in monochrome in a manga, gives me vertigo looking at it, because it's just so well done. The perspective is so well done. And on one hand, this is him giving up. He's saying, if I can't get in there right now to try and save my brother, then it's not worth continuing to live. But on the other hand, I think this shows Kaiba's unique kind of strength. He is willing to risk literally everything to get what he feels he needs. And even though I'm going to dip a little bit into the first chapter of the next review section here for this, even though Anzu tells him off for betting his life so recklessly when there's still plenty of reasons to go on, showing his cowardice, and it's great. It's a great confrontation. She really tells him off. It's one of her stronger moments in this arc, and maybe the entire run of the manga overall. But I kind of disagree with her. Like, yeah, Kaiba probably could have walked up to Yugi and said, hey, you're already heading towards the castle. I'm 100% sure you're going to win your way in by the rules of this tournament. Want to help me get my brother back? Yugi probably would have said yes. Either one of the Yugis probably would have said yes. But that's just not the kind of person he is. He doesn't think that way. And so thinking that he is literally the only person who could save his brother, believing that with his entire being, betting his life to ensure that that happens, I see that as courageous. Maybe that's just me, but that's my takeaway from it. And this is an interesting moment. The other Yugi is still in control, and we know he's harsher and deals with threats more seriously than the little Yugi does. So he's willing to do it. He's willing to attack again and effectively kill Kaiba to get in there to save Grandpa Sugoroku. It's the little Yugi that stops him, asserting himself and preventing him from calling attack and surrendering the duel by letting Kaiba finish him off with a resurrected head of the Blue Eyes White Dragon, losing half of his star chips to Kaiba to fill out the rest of the 10 that Kaiba needs to go in and have his special duel with Pegasus, at a point in the tournament where it's unlikely that there's enough duelists remaining for Yugi to ever win those star chips back elsewhere. Like, they say at one point that only one of these two duelists gets to enter, but like, that's not like a hard rule. Only one of them gets to enter because once this duel is over, at least hypothetically, only one of them will have the available resources to enter. And I think we see two other kinds of courage here in this exchange. Being willing to make a sacrifice of an enemy like that to ensure the life of someone you love takes a kind of strength. I don't know that I necessarily agree with it, but it takes a kind of strength. It takes a kind of courage. And stopping that person, valuing a person's life as much as you value the life of a loved one, and saying, no, I will not take this life to save another, also takes a certain kind of strength and courage. I don't really have much more to say on that. I'm not going to weigh in on who I think is right and who I think is wrong here, because I think you could make arguments either way for any of them. But I just love this moment so much. It's such a strong moment for these characters. It shows who they are and what they stand for. And it's so cool, because even though Kaiba is still the one with the big boss monster that Yugi has to overcome, this entire duel is framed like he's the protagonist of it. Like, even at the end there, right up until little Yugi has to pop in and make that choice, and kind of takes back that role of the protagonist. It feels like Yugi is the antagonist to Kaiba's protagonist for this duel, and it's such an interesting dynamic. Like, you see him come at Yugi with this plan to crush him utterly, and you kind of want to see him succeed. It's very well handled. It's one of the best duels in the entire franchise, because it's so well handled, and the character stuff in it is so incredibly strong. And, like, of course, we know that Yugi is going to get into the castle too. We know that Kaiba's not going to be the one to actually defeat Pegasus, just like we know that Bandit Keith, when he says, "Oh, I'm going to be the one to take Pegasus's head," or whatever, we know it's not going to be him. We know it's going to be Yugi. But that doesn't cheapen any of the emotional stakes here. And while I do disagree with how the anime handles everything with the other Yugi and who has knowledge of him when, I will admit that when, in the anime, Yugi starts to have a breakdown over feeling like he can't trust the other Yugi anymore, choosing that moment to be the moment where he tells the others that he knows that there's this other him inside of him, it works. Like, superficially it works. It's just that, like, continuity-wise, it doesn't quite fit with some of the stuff we've seen this arc, because that other stuff was written as if all of the characters were aware of the other Yugi like they were in the manga. Because Yugi is about to have something of a breakdown. And it's going to be pretty interesting to see. It's the character thread that weaves together basically all of the Yugi-related stuff throughout the entire tournament finals. There's not much more to say about this one, aside from Anzu going off on Kaiba and telling him off, basically espousing her support for Yugi's point of view in all of this. There isn't much resolution to this. Kaiba's resolution comes from the fact that he now gets to duel Pegasus, and it's not going to go well for him, but it's going to be interesting, and we'll see. And Yugi's resolution in this comes from him having to become more balanced, find a better balance with his other self. The two of them are going to have to start acknowledging each other as separate characters and working together from this point forward. And that becomes the defining character dynamic for basically the rest of this story's run. And to get all of that fantastic stuff, all of that fantastic character stuff in this story, and to get all that fantastic stuff from this story, it's basically just icing that the duel is also really freaking good. Like, again, stuff happens in it that could never really work in the real card game, but it's a really tactical duel, and the stuff that the characters do makes sense. I really enjoy it. And, like, the visuals are pretty fantastic too. The first time Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon uses its ultimate burst, it looks like the thing could level cities. It's so cool looking. And Kaiba's dialogue in this duel is some of the best ever. He's so melodramatic through the whole thing. It's a wonderful read. And I don't have much more to say about it than that. I could revisit these chapters basically anytime. All of that said, though, guys, what do you think of the rooftop duel between Yugi and Kaiba at Duelist Kingdom? If you have read it, let's get a discussion going in the comments section down below. And while you're down there, you might as well like the video, share it with anyone else who you think would enjoy my content, subscribe if you haven't. You can also check out links to my various social medias, as well as the many ways you can help out the channel. Those will be in the video description, but either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.